Friday, May 3rd, 2019, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. This morning I'm going to continue with the format from yesterday. Some of you enjoyed it, and let's see if others enjoy it as well. I want to talk about the gold standard, why gold is much more important than just an individual protection against monetary mayhem. In my opinion, gold and the gold standard are synonymous with peace, prosperity, and limited government. And I'll prove with data from the Bank of England of all institutions. They've kept an inflation calculator going back hundreds of years, and I'll prove to you how all this talk nowadays from central bankers themselves that we need inflation to keep the economy going is just bunkum. And how you could teach school children just going through these numbers from the Bank of England, how the period for example, between 1821 and 1914 was a period of great stability, of actually a little bit of deflation in the UK, but it was a period of the Industrial Revolution when the UK or Britain became very, very wealthy and developed massively economically. I know that it wasn't a perfect period, Victorian times, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about the numbers, the inflation, and what was going on economically. And I'm going to reference this book here as well, War and Gold, which I've been reading. I haven't finished, by Kwasi Kwarteng, a 500-year history of empires, adventures, and debt. I haven't finished the book, but I'm on my way to finishing it. But there's a very interesting section here about England and the UK just before World War I and what was going on, and I'll go through also the inflation calculator from the Bank of England. So I'll start with that, with the inflation calculator. And I'll show you some periods that I think are significant. First of all, we'll go from 1717, which was the year that Isaac Newton, as the master of the mint in London, put the UK on a gold standard. Up until 1914, which was the year the year that World War I broke out. So you can see here from this calculator, in that almost 200-year period, 10 pounds in 1717 would cost 18 pounds 17 in 1914. So there was some kind of, how can I say, inflation, but look at the average inflation, 0.3%. And I think a lot of that inflation was incurred in the 18th century with the War of Independence against the colonies in the U.S., the French and Indian War. That led to a lot of that inflation, but still 0.3%, not much. But we're here to look at the period a little later, but I wanted to start out in that period. So 0.3% inflation. Almost zero, right? And then let's have a look at 1797 to 1914. Why did I pick 1797? Well, they suspended convertibility of banknotes into gold in 1797 for the Napoleonic Wars. That lasted until 1821. So I wanted to see, from 1797 to 1914 again. And you've got 10 pounds in 1797. You only needed 10 pounds 89 in 1914. So almost zero inflation there, as you can see, 0.1%. And then I looked at the period from 1797 to 1821, the period where there was the Napoleonic Wars, and 1821 is when the UK or Britain was put back on a gold standard, and there was you could take your banknotes to the bank and get your gold. So there was convertibility into specie of banknotes. So 10 pounds in 1797, you needed 1144 in 1821. So even though Britain went on a paper money irredeemable system for almost 25 years, it was well controlled nevertheless, and there was only 0.6% inflation a year. So all this talk now that we need to have 2% inflation at least, that we can't let inflation go to zero, is just hogwash. All right. What's the next period? Well, this is an interesting one because it's 1821 when the UK went back. People could start redeeming their banknotes again. And by that, I don't mean just like amongst countries between, England and France, but anyone domestically in England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, Northern Ireland could redeem their banknotes for gold at a fixed rate. A pound note was a pound. So from that period, 10 pounds in 1821, you only needed 9 pounds 51 in 1914. So inflation was negative 0.1%. And I mean, if you told these PhD economists right now, and someone maybe who's starting to study economics at a major university, that inflation was negative in the most of the period after the Napoleonic Wars till World War I, they'd say, "Wow, that must have been a really horrible period of massive, Great Depression. The country must have, been in ruins." They couldn't have been, you wouldn't be further from the truth by saying that. This is the big thing here. It just goes to show you how paper money, irredeemable money, which the UK has been under basically since 1931. Well, actually 1914 domestically, even though Britain went back on the gold standard in 1926 till 1931, it was just for international, transactions between the government and other governments. So yeah, you have to go back, till 1914 and our great-grandparents or further back to a time where money had a fixed measure of value. 1 pound was, a fixed weight of gold, and it didn't change. And why is that important? Well, because it creates stability in the system. Can you imagine if measures of weight changed every day? How difficult it would be for people to kind of know what weight they should be, how much they should pay for products that need to be weighed. What about if we changed the standard for heights? It would be a mess, right? And that's the same thing for money. And why is gold and silver as well so important? Well, because they've shown over time, over thousands of years, that they're a very good measure of value, that their purchasing power does not fluctuate so much over the long term. And I've just shown you here from the Bank of England data, right? So this is the one that, in my opinion, proves totally, irrefutably, that if we want sound money, if we want no inflation, if we want prosperity, we need to go back to a monetary system where there is a fixed or stable measure of value, and that's under a gold standard. So look at 10 pounds in 1914. What does it cost now? The equivalent of 10 pounds in 1914 now is 1,133 pounds and 47 pence. And I would say that's even probably more, because I don't really trust, the way they measure inflation in the last 20, 30 years. So I would say that's probably even more. But you can see here, inflation in that 104-year period averaged 4.7%. So compare that to 1821 to 1914, where it averaged minus 0.1%. I mean, there you go. And I wanted to also look at the, before I go into the book, to the period from 1971 to now, 2018. This is the latest data they have. They'll have 2019 in January of 2020, so I have to wait. So 10 pounds in 1971 is now 138.85. Again, I think that's probably higher, but we'll take their number. But you can just see that inflation, since the whole world, the US went off the gold standard. Nixon temporarily closed the gold window. Inflation has averaged 5.8% a year here in the UK. So yeah, stick to banknotes. It will not get you very far in the long term in terms of purchasing power. That's all I can say. So now to the book. Because nowadays as well, people say, oh, we need inflation, inflation's too low. We need to keep rates low. But back in this period, in the 19th century, the bank rate, the Bank of England rate, was around 5%, fluctuated between 4 and 5%. So, with inflation at zero, and actually gilts, I think yielded at around 3%, 2 3/4, 3%. You had a real return on your capital that was fairly safe, of almost 3%. Nowadays, with gilt yields at about 1%, maybe a little more, and inflation running at 5-6%, they're confiscating your wealth. Wake up, wake up. This is not just for, this is for everyone. It's not about class or about wealthy and poor or rich. It's about everyone. I'm sure there's a lot of very wealthy people who don't know this and have a lot of, money in the bank, and they don't realize they're being robbed. And this is also to the socialists out there, to the trade unions who want their workers to earn a living wage. How can you earn a living wage when every year that wage, that salary or wage is being chipped away by massive inflation? This is an interesting part here of the book. This is on page 93. I wanted to read this to you about the national debt. The fact that even though the Bank of England was created, and it did lead to the, to the creation or to the growth of the national debt in the UK and Britain, it wasn't as bad in the 19th century. So I'll read here from page 93. This is the chapter London 1914, so London just prior to the war. The casual Edwardian idiom about the government's shouldering the whole thing went to the core of the issue. The British government in its fiscal policies had been impressively consistent for 100 years. Remarkably, the century from 1815 to 1914 had seen British nominal national debt actually fall. The debt in 1818 stood at 843 million. After a century of balanced budgets, that figure stood at just under 706 million in 1914. So amazing, they actually paid off some of the debt. This fact was a great testament to prudence and financial restraint, a legacy of the attitude towards public finance of such statesmen as Sir Robert Peel and his protege William Gladstone. By 1921, after 4 years of carnage and 3 more of financial upheaval, the gold standard was still suspended, and the national debt had soared to 7.8 billion, a nominal increase of 1,154% in just 7 years. Well, now it's what I think it's almost it's over 2,500 billion now, the national debt. So quite amazing. Just goes to show that we don't need this system. In the book here, he talks about how things were very stable. England was doing very well. 1914, you had the stability of the monetary system, you had the fiscal stability, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this war started, and the world was turned upside down. So maybe, hopefully, today in 2019, we've got the complete opposite, right? We're like in the world of endless wars, massive inflation, massive debt, and it doesn't seem that we can get away from it. Maybe things will change, like all of a sudden, but who knows? We can only hope. So there you go, irrefutable proof that under a sound money system, gold standard, fiscal rectitude of the government, limited government, Britain flourished during the Industrial Revolution. And of course, there are pros and cons about the Industrial Revolution, but we saw there from 1821 to 1914, inflation was actually negative 0.1, and since 1914 till now, inflation has averaged almost 5. And look at how much debt we have. Gold is important on an individual basis, in my opinion, but for me, it's much more than that, actually. It's more about having, a fixed weight of value, something stable. It will help society in general, and it will keep government in check, in my opinion. And it did in the 19th century. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, make sure you hit the little notification bell above to be notified of all my new videos. You can also follow me on Steemit, DTube, and on Twitter. I wish you all a great day. Take care. Bye.